So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. We're really excited to have Angela back with us to talk about another nutrition topic. So this was requested by a couple coaches after another session that Angela ran about nutrition, and we wanted to dig in more to how to fuel vegetarian and vegan athletes. So today Angela will be discussing the vegetarian considerations for athletes. So Angela, I'll get you to take away from here, and just a reminder to stick to the chat box for the duration of the presentation, and then we will open up for Q&A at the end.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. I see a few familiar names. Though I can't see faces, I'm seeing some nice, beautiful profile pictures and beaches and things. So, so welcome. Yes, lots of, I guess, movement towards vegetarian styles or vegetarian ways of eating over the last probably 4 or 5 years I've seen for various different reasons. So we're going to cover a few topics in that area of vegetarian ways of eating, specifically as it relates to benefits and maybe potential risks of certain types of vitamins and minerals with athletes. I think now let me click this way. Okay. I think since the new food guide came out, which is great, lots of positive, benefits to the new food guide in terms of general healthy eating. As it relates to athletes, I mean, like the old food guide as well, it doesn't quite meet the overall needs of an athletic population. But there was lots of good things about the new food guide. Obviously more plant-based considerations, less on animal product. Not to say that it's bad, or not to say that they removed dairy and beef and pork and all those sort of quote unquote bad proteins. But there was definitely more emphasis on plant-based proteins, and more just generalized in terms of, ways of connecting with food and things like that. So there's lots of good reasons, but it did stem a lot of sort of people, consumers and athletes both, just kind of to question their current maybe diet or intake, and maybe start to choose maybe more plant-based styles of eating. So today we're just going to cover a bit in terms of protein, because when we talk about plant-based, that is sort of one of the main nutrients that we will talk about in terms of just the quality of the protein, and the quantity in terms of a vegetarian diet. We'll talk about the benefits of a vegetarian diet for sure. There are definite benefits. Then we'll talk about nutrients at risk in terms of vegetarian styles of eating. Somewhere in there I have sort of the various types of vegetarian ways of eating, because there's lots of new ones that come out, seems to be every year, different styles. And then we're going to, again, talk about meeting those, how we can actually encourage our athletes to make sure they're getting the quality amount of protein that they would need to support their training environments. And I think just to kind of preface it, I find that, anything's doable and anything can be healthy, and anything can meet our requirements. It just takes a little bit extra work. I just finished teaching a summer course at the university, and it was funny, I had no nutrition students in this class. It was a general nutrition intro class, and they were all non-nutrition students. So they came like with virtually no nutrition background. And we started off talking a lot about the food guide, and then we did a paper on vegetarian eating. And then I actually had one student that decided to, because of everything she learned, wanted to try vegetarian ways of eating for her and her family, just to see how sort of cumbersome it was. And then she's doing her own sort of nutrition analysis just to see if she's actually meeting her overall, because that was her case study for the course, to see exactly if she's actually meeting those overall nutrients that might be at risk. So it's kind of interesting just to see, and we put ourselves into, I mean, she's in sort of isolation right now, being able to focus and plan and, maybe create new kind of meals. But when we're talking about athletes and traveling, that's where we have to kind of get back to, is it practical while still being able to meet all those needs when we have athletes that are kind of out of their own sort of home environment and planning and preparing their own meals more than 50% of the time. So that's where I think some of the attention is a little bit different when we relate this kind of way of eating with athletes. Don't even get me started on game changers, because I did a whole class on game changers, and maybe that's another session. That was our last class. I made them watch game changers, and then we critically assessed based on credible evidence what that documentary was really saying, and how credible what they were actually supplying in terms of evidence-based research, loosely say that, how that might change their kind of way of accepting that type of information. So because that was really heavily focused on athletes. I had athletes call me all hours of the night after that was released and say, I'm changing the way I'm eating. And I had big meat eater athletes at the time, and they said, I don't want my blood to look like that vial after the guy ate the bean burrito. Well, you don't know what else he was eating for the last 3 months. They took his blood right after he had a beef burrito. Well, that doesn't tell us much in terms of long term. So anyway, think with a critical eye. Everything that we're presented with, whether it's sugars, whether it's fats, whether it's sodium, like, we're always kind of black or white. We've got to pick a side. Do we actually have to pick a side? Unless there's, again, sort of ethical reasons or cultural reasons that you're choosing those things. We need to think more critically when it comes down to seeing documentaries and watching YouTube and Instagram channels that is really like all or nothing, right? Yeah. Wheat's bad, or oat's bad, carbs are bad, let's go with fat, so the paleo world and all of that. So really caution in terms of, again, looking at the hierarchy of the evidence, obviously peer-reviewed meta-analysis types of research. If that's sort of in some of these articles, reviews, whatever it is you're reading. I love this slide, because it really does show kind of case studies and anecdotal reports. Very bottom, like, very loose research, right? Cross-sectional studies, case control studies, a little bit higher cohort studies. That's the strength of the evidence. And it's not just one study. It's got to have, a good body of evidence-based research to support some of these findings. So just a little fuel for thought in terms of when you're faced with some of these maybe questions from your athletes, even like, question where it's coming from. If it's sometimes too good to be true and testimonials, obviously it's probably not evidence-based or science-backed. So let's talk about kind of where we get protein normally. Obviously, I think we all know all our pulses, or like beans and lentils. Soy, are kind of middle of the road in terms of how Canadians are consuming right now. And I expect this data was probably a couple years old, so it's probably more focused. In terms of the pulses, and nuts and seeds are probably a little higher now. Poultry, meats, dairy products, I would suspect actually probably a decrease in Canadian consumption, and cereal products. So yeah, we do get some protein, not a lot, but because Canadians love their grains still, we do get a significant amount of protein still from that. We're going to talk about quality in a sec, because it's probably still not the best quality, but definitely we do get some. So little in fruits, obviously eggs, fish too, are probably a little higher on that scale. I would suspect now too. This data is probably about 4 years old. So when we talk about protein requirements, so again, when we talk about vegetarian ways of eating, and I'm going to get to kind of the different classifications in a second, we have sort of what we call our general macronutrient distribution range. So AMDR is just the acronym for that. So basically we have a percentage of what we know should come from protein in an average Canadian diet. When we talk about athletes, we have a very specific amount of protein that we know is based on body weight per day. If we average those percentages into sort of a non-athletic population, you're probably looking about 0.8 grams per kilo body weight per day. And then when we get into adolescent athletes, you're probably looking a little bit higher, even upwards of 2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. And then we have adult athletes, so which can vary depending on sport and age as well. So definitely we know we need more. Obviously we have protein oxidation, and that happens in the early stages of strength training. So we might actually need probably a little bit higher on that previous slide, that average macronutrient range. You know, maybe it's like 30 to 35%, again, depending on the types of training that they're doing or the phase of training that they're in, because usually their protein requirements will do this, and that's good classic nutrition periodization if we're doing that well. So it might sort of vary on that higher end of that macronutrient range, but definitely it's probably going to be more than 15% of their overall, acronyms. We're known for acronyms in sport. EER, estimated energy requirements, should be coming from protein. So based on the position paper from 2018 from Dietitians of Canada and the American College of Sports Medicine and the American Dietetic Association, we've reviewed all the research to say that we kind of know, most athletes, if they're in more of like an aerobic phase of training or endurance, should be around 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilo body weight per day. Strength training, again, depending on the intensity, but probably more like 1.6 and upwards of 1.7 grams per kilogram. Timing, obviously important in terms of spreading that out through the day. Vegans, however, can be up to, again, a little bit higher than that strength training. No matter what types of training that they're doing, they're suggesting that vegans may have a higher requirement just because of the ability for them to access and get quality protein sources in their diet is a little more difficult. So we know that they tend to be a little bit lower. So again, that's 2 years old. I would suspect, again, more plant-based foods on the market, making it more available for vegetarian ways of eating. That may not be, that case so much anymore, but at least that's our recommendation from 2018 position paper. So yeah, a little bit more for athletes, and then we're going to look at kind of the quality of that protein from a plant-based diet. So just a review, kind of, again, that's taken right from the position paper, the kind of scale in terms of the amounts of protein that we need. You can kind of see the highest we go is 2. Dietary reports from most athletes are usually getting, 2 to 2.2 grams per kilo a day. Then you've got athletes who are trying to consume, 4,000 calories to meet their energy needs. Again, if they're whether they're vegan or not, if they're meeting those needs, they should be able to get sort of that, that higher, 1.8 or 2 grams per kilo body weight per day. So you just do your own math, like, a 60 kilo athlete, which is, that's a smaller athlete. They're looking at 120 grams of protein if they're adolescent and if they're mature. So that's kind of the same because we tend to lose muscle mass, right? Sarcopenia as we age. So more mature or master's level athletes will also be somewhere in that 2 gram per kilo range. So then if you've got restricted diets or intakes for whatever reason, that number may be harder to get. And then you're going to, again, compound that with the challenge of getting quality proteins in through vegan options. It does present sometimes a challenge with athletes. So let's just switch to protein quality for a second. So when we talk about protein quality, we're going to talk about amino acids. So we're getting into a little bit of science here, but we all know, everyone seems to know BCAAs, and then they go, oh yeah, amino acids. Okay, those are the building blocks of protein. So we've got 20 different amino acids, and I've got a next slide to show you what that actually looks like. But based on, and we have different ways of calculating the quality of that protein based on the amount of those 20 amino acids that are present in that food item. So protein quality is basically the measure of how efficiently that a protein in the diet can be used to make other body proteins. So we've got, I'll talk about in a second, the differences. We've got two sort of chunks of amino acids. And I always say, remember the little Lego blocks that the kids always played with? They're all over my floor right now. If you can picture 20 different colors, 20 different shapes of all those Lego blocks, each one is an amino acid. Think about all the combinations that can be made with those Lego blocks. Millions, right? So if we took 11 of those and said, you know what, those are kind of amino acids that we can take in through diet, but our bodies can actually make them. 9 of those amino acids our bodies can't make. So those are, again, really important to get through diet in order to make what we call complete proteins, which would have all of those essential amino acids and probably some, non-essential amino acids, or those ones that are indispensable or dispensable to support overall protein synthesis. So you need all 20, you definitely need those 9. And we even know a lot about, in terms of the research, certain amino acids that are really sort of those instigators or stimulators for muscle protein synthesis. And more research is coming out about some of those. We know leucine, isoleucine, and valine, or branched amino acids, have a lot of, again, evidence to support that muscle repair and growth. So complete proteins would have all those essential amino. Oh, did you lose me? My internet connection said it's not stable. Anyway, so complete proteins would have all those essential amino acids. Incomplete proteins would have a deficit of 1 or more of those essential amino acids. So definitely not having all 9. So again, lots of kind of different ways to calculate protein quality in terms of score. There's some research or scales to promote at what sort of quality a protein is based on the amount of those essential amino acids that they have in that food item, and that's called the protein digestibility amino acid score. So that's basically what an amino acid looks like. So again, building blocks of protein, they contain central carbon atom bound to hydrogen, an amine group, and an acid group, and then that side chain, which is that kind of unique string on that amino acid. So I talked about that. Essential, again, those are, indispensable amino acids. They can't be made. They need to be taken in through diet. And then the non-essential are the ones that we can actually make, as long as we have sufficient enzymes and hormones and a good energy coming in to make those things happen. So there they all are. This is taken from one of my texts, so you're back into Nutrition Intro 101. Those are all our essential amino acids. Again, lots of sort of research being done on all these guys in terms of muscle protein synthesis. The ones hot right now are those is leucine, and then we have isoleucine as well. And then there's some really interesting research around arginine and the nitric oxide cycle and all kinds of, again, interesting things for sport performance in that one. The ones that are starred on the right are what we call conditionally essential. So again, they need to have a certain amount of energy and other hormones to be able to support some of that synthesis. And then we have recommendations for amounts of those essential amino acids. Very different in terms of sport, for recovery, as we're seeing right now with leucine. I think I just heard from an Australian conference a couple of weeks ago that they're actually suggesting now leucine be recommended in a gram per kilo per body weight per day in an immediate recovery phase, because they know that it's driving that muscle protein synthesis faster. So I don't think I included this slide, but do we all know where leucine is mostly found? I can't see any chat, so I don't know, but I'll tell you. Dairy. So it's found in whey. So it's the highest in whey. There's some in egg, and there's also some in soy, but it's in smaller amounts. So that's why whey and dairy keep getting, again, the accolades it does, because the whey protein and because the content of leucine is the highest. And now, again, sort of the research is suggesting even a specific dose amount of leucine needs to be present in recovery. So vegetarians not doing dairy might be at a bit of a disadvantage in terms of a recovery phase if they're recovering from injury, because leucine would be harder to get in plant-based foods. So yeah, so here's sort of a scale in terms of protein quality. Obviously, you know, the blue and the red blocks. So the blue is all your dairy, and then and your red is more of your meat and alternatives items. So yeah, we do get some good quality protein from nuts and seeds and nut butters, but as you can see on the scale, it's not as great as you would be from cottage cheese, some from cheddar cheese, dairy, yogurt. And then is soy on here? No, it isn't. We'll talk about soy in a second. And then fish and beef and some of your obviously meat items would be the highest. Again, unprocessed animal foods would have all those, provide all 20 amino acids, and then how they vary in terms of the body's ability to hold that nitrogen, which is really how we, if we're in net nitrogen positive balance, then that's going to help in terms of muscle protein synthesis, and if the goal is for the athlete to gain lean muscle. Yeah, so I talked about that. It's based on that protein digestibility score, amino acids based on whole proteins. It's based on the on egg whites, where that would be 1, and then for meat it's 0.92. So obviously very, very high, and then it gets less in terms of other plant-based foods. So we have an athlete deciding to go vegan, totally cool, right? We can do anything. Again, it needs to have a bit of, a bit more focus and attention and planning. So we talk about types of vegetarian. Obviously vegetarian is no meat, fish, or lactose would also, exclude those, and also exclude eggs, but it allows dairy. So here's where we get a little kind of confusing, right? So you always have to ask somebody, like, what type of vegetarian way are you eating? Then we know best how to help them. Lacto-ovo vegetarian would exclude all of those meat, fish, or fowl, but it would allow dairy and eggs, where an ovo vegetarian would exclude those and only allow eggs. Pescatarian, a lot more I'm finding over the last year or so are pescatarians, so they would include fish, eggs, and dairy, and exclude obviously meat and fowl. And then vegan would be absolutely none of the above. So all of those would be excluded. Then we have flexitarians. Yeah, some days on this, some days on that, some days, right? So I don't know whether that fits under vegetarian. It's just I think a more personal way of eating sometimes. So anyway, it's termed under the vegetarian ways of eating. But again, I think, yeah, that's a great way, because I think most athletes tend to kind of go that way when they realize, in terms of camps and traveling and things like that. I mean, I know I've been to games. We fight all the time on the menu to get something other than beans, which is high in fiber, which we don't want during competition, on the livid menu. They never have, a full on, 5 different varieties of a hot meal on the line for vegan. not just vegetarian, but vegan, no dairy, no, right? None of that. And they're just not, they're not equipped most times to have that much variety on the menu, even though I've got about 20 studies sitting here in terms of games and past games evaluation of menus. And they know that that's what the athletes from all different countries, whether it's cultural or not, want. We rarely see that happen in terms of when the actual menu goes in to play. There's usually not a good selection. So, and that's what we're challenged with. Hopefully, when I'll live to see the day where, you know, there will be standards for menus in terms of travel and camps and game environments with athletes, because I think this is a big area for all you know, multicultural athletes. So why do athletes follow a vegan diet? Mom told me it's good. My friend's doing it. She's lost some weight. I want to change body image, you know, whatever. Maybe it's for health. Maybe because, you know, I know that I'm going to get a little, maybe more fiber. I'm going to get maybe lower fat, maybe for, you know, heart disease risk, reducing cancer, you know, all those things that we're hearing about in terms of, you know, red meat and pork not being as, not to say we can never have them, but at the levels that we were having them could create increased risk for some of those diseases. Maybe it's animal welfare. Still, those concerns are around, and environmental. So the one good thing about Game Changers is, if anyone's ever seen that, if you haven't, you're going to go watch it tonight, is the piece on environmental. Absolutely, it does, you know, decrease that that carbon footprint, and lots of reasons why one would choose to follow that for environmental reasons. Others, again, could just be never really liked that. For me, my mom always overcooked beef. It turned me off, so I don't eat beef, not for any other reason except I just don't like it. And I worked for an abattoir, so that probably did a little more mental damage for my consumption of beef. But finding these reasons out are good, because they could be skewed from a non, again, evidence-based reason as to why they're choosing a vegetarian diet. So finding that out first. Benefits, as I kind of alluded to, you know, animal products provide sources of protein, absolutely, B vitamins, minerals, iron, and zinc, and calcium, which all those on the right that I've listed, maybe some nutrients that we might want to kind of follow and highlight in a vegetarian diet to make sure they're getting those. But animal products are low in fiber and can be high in fat. So likewise, vegetarian styles of eating can be quite healthy and can be a quite healthy lifestyle change for those that were really, and I say omnivores because, you know, they're, you know, you'd have to be just eating meat, but those athletes who would be over consuming in those areas may find a health benefit from reducing fat, saturated fat, and increasing fiber. Plant sources of protein can be a good source of B vitamins as well, can be a source of iron, can be a source of zinc. So in the Game Changers movie, you know, they alluded to some of this, but what they didn't sort of hone in on is the fact that even though they have those nutrients, how are they being absorbed? So it's great to consume them, but if they're not being absorbed, we're not obviously making use of those. So we're going to touch on, we touched on protein quality already. I'll focus just a bit on that. B12, iron, calcium, vitamin D, omega-3, and zinc. So those are the ones that we would pay a little bit more close attention to in a vegetarian style of eating. And again, going to be different in terms of what style of vegetarianism they are following as to which of these nutrients may be more at risk or not. So plant-based sources, we've got beans, we've got grains, whole grains, absolutely, nuts and seeds. We've got tofu, good quality amount. And then if we have obviously protein powders, I've yet to see a good quality plant-based protein powder. Again, that's got the leucine and is a good quality. again, quality amino acid profile wise, protein that actually tastes good. So probably not the best way for most of our vegan athletes to get some good quality protein is through protein supplements. So again, those are the needs there. So, I mean, you're looking at some of these, and, you know, soy or tofu is probably one of your best sources of protein. And again, we'll look at that. So, there are what we call, and we looked at complete proteins a second ago. So complete proteins being, again, they have all those essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids, but they all the essential amino acids. There's only 2 plant-based proteins that actually have all of those essential amino acids, and one's higher on that protein digestibility score than the other. I don't know, I've kind of alluded to it already. So soy and quinoa are the only 2. In a lot of vegan diets, I see really good, you know, again, beans, lentils, pulses. Those are all great and good, you know, good to get the amount of protein, but it's not the quality that we would need for maximizing muscle protein synthesis and recovery. And then I get the question all the time, I'll take this offline if anybody wants to chat about it, but, you know, well, isn't soy bad? I want to, you know, I have a male athlete, a vegan athlete, and doesn't want to consume soy because, you know, of the isoflavones and all the, you know, hormone considerations around that. You'd have to eat quite a lot of it in order to get sort of that risk of, again, cancer, and those who've had maybe breast cancer and things like that. So there's lots of research around that. I think, again, at the levels we're talking about, unless they were solely getting all their protein needs from soy, we don't have to worry about those amounts. Yeah, so I thought soy protein was bad. In fact, soy protein's been quite popular and again, evidence-based in the research to say that there is some cardiovascular benefits from consuming soy, and that's, again, the isoflavones, and then may have a good effect in terms of lipid profile. Again, low in saturated fats too, right? So great switch. That's why Canada's Food Guide is now promoting more of these plant-based proteins so that we can include, again, get our fiber up, which we know Canadians are poor in, and get our saturated fat intake down as well. And so that's kind of the amounts in terms of isoflavones that you're looking at in common foods. Again, soy, tofu, right? All your soy products. Soy beverages are less. So again, if we're looking at supplementing like a cow's milk, that would be the one milk alternative that I would recommend, because the protein amount is comparable to a cow's milk, and it's complete protein, and it doesn't have a lot of those isoflavones. So again, good for those male athletes who may be a little more cautious around soy. So how do we meet, again, complete proteins if we're not doing all soy and all quinoa? We want to enjoy all the benefits of lentils and beans and pulses, as well as our grains. So those are all incomplete proteins. If we pair, you know, throughout our daily, weekly diet, our grains, our nuts, and our seeds with legumes. So again, as long as they're not eliminating, you know, fortified grains, and things like that, then they can actually get a good complement of all those amino acids. So it's great. And we used to say years ago they had to be combined in the same meal in order to get the benefit of those total amino acids. Now we're saying, you know what, as long as they have a good varied diet and they're kind of including those overall, then they can actually get a good amount of their RDAs, their recommended dietary allowance, for those amino acids met throughout like their diet. Again, I bring it back, again, we're in sport, right? So I bring it, that's great for the general population, but if we're talking about those specific essential amino acids in recovery, how many athletes, vegan athletes, do you know that are making, you know, a soy protein based or quinoa based smoothie in recovery or having like a soy protein bar to get the quality of that amino acid leucine in for sport and muscle protein synthesis, right? So that's the kind of twist I always kind of put on it, because it might be a little more challenging. So let's talk about B12. So deficiencies may be common with vegan athletes, and it can mask, sorry, that's a typo, the high intake of folate. So if they have a lot of folate, again, from grains, are fortified, not whole grains, but processed grains are fortified with folate, that actually mask a B12 deficiency. So if they're including lots of, again, grains, that might be something you might want to look at and screen for B12. Usually now B12 is fortified in a lot of these milk alternatives. So cashew milk, soy milk, all of those will actually have quite a significant amount of B12 added back to it. Usually for most vegans, I would definitely probably get them to include a little bit of nutritional yeast. So sprinkle a couple teaspoons on their, pasta or in their soups, stews, whatever, to get a good source of B12. It's also in eggs. So if they are including eggs in their diet, then that would be a good source. And then you might have to have a supplement. So let's talk about iron for a couple minutes. So as with protein, we know vegetarian styles of eating have a less ability to have good absorbable forms of iron. Not to say they can't get it through all those foods on the bottom, absolutely. But when we compare how well they're absorbed, it is less than an animal-based source or a heme-based source. Plus, if we've got other inhibitors to that iron absorption, phytates, so, shellfish and wheat bran have phytates, coffee, tea, some spices, and fiber are all things that may bind the iron and not be able to be absorbed. So may look good, their hemoglobin may look good, but their storage form and absorbable form of iron might be low. Some things likewise can enhance the absorption, vitamin C, so including their non-animal based sources of iron with a good vitamin C source, and eliminating those foods above will work to kind of increase that absorption rate of iron. Anytime you're taking iron supplements, if you've got athletes taking iron supplements, really encourage them to talk to a sport dietitian, but usually on an empty stomach. Sometimes we split the dose and then include, obviously, a vitamin C with that. Calcium has been equivocally in the research shown that it could potentially decrease the absorption of iron as well. So again, empty stomach, if they can tolerate it, usually at bedtime, an hour after their, bedtime protein snack. So where can we get iron? Soy products, beans, legumes, cereals. All of our grains are fortified. Again, our processed grains are fortified with iron. Yes, we get some from dark greens and spinach and all that. You'd have to eat like my whole garden full of spinach right now. I'm just kidding, but probably half, to get the amount of iron. And again, how is it absorbed? Nuts, seeds, and yeah, we got some from dark chocolate. So yay. Other things that affect iron in terms of the athletes is all where we're losing that iron as well. So heavy menstrual cycles, we do lose some in urine, a small amount in sweat. Foot strike, which basically is just a hemodilution of red blood cells. So if you've got any of you are athletics coaches or runners, that can, again, destruct our red blood cells and then lead to possibly some iron deficiencies, or mask maybe an iron deficiency. Blood donors, usually vegans. I don't recommend them to be blood donors. Training at high altitudes, again, would also increase your iron requirements. And then you got those athletes that just eat poorly, right? So if they're eating poorly, not even meeting their protein needs, and then they've got a vegan lifestyle on top of that, really hard to get their iron and protein needs met. So some deficiency symptoms, I know you guys are probably kind of familiar with that. Sometimes it's, obviously I'm tired, I'm fatigued, it must be my iron. Yeah, it could be just overall energy intake too. But yeah, maybe some iron deficiency. And we do have a higher benchmark in terms of iron requirements, in terms of what we look for as an adequate level than the regular population. So athletes go get their blood work done, they come back, doc says, oh, your iron's fine. And I said, no, I want to see the report. And actually it's in the toilet because we have such a higher minimum level for athlete requirements. So any of these symptoms, impaired muscular performance. So again, they're really just not recovering. They've got impaired resistance to infection. So again, not recovering from certain infections or like even just common colds and flus and things like that. Elevated pulse, confusion, impaired ability to like maintain a good core body temperature. Those are all other symptoms of iron deficiencies that kind of pushed in the back a bit, just because we're athletes in sport, and there's, we don't really maybe pay too much into that because it's just common ways of athlete training, right? When in fact it could be an iron deficiency. So I talked about iron supplementation, lots of different types of iron supplements. And there's newer ways of taking iron supplements, because we're seeing that there's a hormone that actually is elevated during intense training. That hormone, it's called hepcidin, actually decreases the iron absorption. So now we got athletes training. We're not going to tell them to stop training so we can up their iron with supplements or food, but we almost need to maybe bring down the dose, because it's a dose response as well with iron. So the higher that iron bolus supplement, again, can increase that hepcidin response as well. So now we're suggesting like smaller doses and maybe every other day to have a better absorption of iron with athletes. So okay, going to focus a bit on calcium. Again, if they're lacto-ovo or ovo, if they're avoiding dairy, there's obviously some concern around not getting adequate absorbable calcium from our greens or tofu. Obviously, if it's fortified, so fortified orange juice, great. So we do have some fortified foods as well. But also looking at some high sodium intakes, and we look at sodium again with athletes and replacing sodium. And sulfur foods can actually increase calcium losses as well. So they might have a double whammy there. And then vitamin D, again, not going to focus a whole lot on that, because I think just in general, athletes are just poor vitamin D intakes in North America in general. So, some research is now saying if they're indoor sports, maybe we look at like a generalized supplement. They're actually looking at increasing the upper limit of vitamin D to be a little bit higher, but then again, not super mega dosing, because if you're overdosing in one, then you're probably decreasing the absorption of other vitamins or minerals potentially. So really important in terms of bone, but there's newer research in terms of skeletal muscle, injury prevention, obviously concussion, which is a whole other ball game, increasing type 2 muscle fibers, reducing inflammation, improving neuromuscular function. So it's a lot more than just bone health with vitamin D. Again, here's another one where we're seeing higher minimum levels of requirement in terms of blood work, what we would see as deficient. So we're seeing, maybe insufficiency at 50 to 75 nanomoles per liter, and definitely deficient if they're under 50. And you look at, again, the vitamin D scores coming on blood work, and if it's, I can't remember, Melissa's on the call, but if it's, I think the bottom number is like 12 or something crazy. It's really low. So if you fall within that range, they're like, you're good. But in our sport world, it's not good because of all the benefits that we're seeing in terms of vitamin D.
That's, first of all, Angela, if you can even get them to test vitamin D levels, that's a trick as well.
Yeah. So in Nova Scotia, we only allow vitamin D to be tested once, unless you have a good sport doc that you work with, which we do now. So she knows the importance of vitamin D, and we can actually require testing, because if it shows normal, they won't retest for another year. They're normal. Other provinces have different regulations. I think BC allows twice a year, so every 6 months, again, unless you're low. So just check with your local health department, or you work with your sport doc. So yeah, we get it from the sun, but I don't know very many athletes who are out like between the hours of 11 and 2 when the sun's at its peak in the middle of the summer and no sunscreen on, and then more exposure, which would be their trunks. Maybe if you're on the beach in a bikini with, nothing, maybe beach volleyball, I don't know. Then they're probably not getting that synthesis from the sun. Okay. So you don't get it through, sun protection, SPF, through clothing. Dark skinned athletes as well. The pigmentation doesn't allow for that synthesis of BV rays. So if we're looking at supplements, there's 2 different types. So again, if we're looking at a true vegan, they're going to do a vitamin D2, which is ergocalciferol. That is less bioavailable. So just so we know, that's what we're dealing with. Then your D3, which is made from sheep's lanolin, I think. And then I love this slide. I show this with my athletes all the time. So yeah, cool. I'm going to eliminate dairy. How am I going to get the amount of nutrients all on the left if I were consuming an alternative, product? So I think the circle should have been over in the soy. I moved my slides a bit. So if we're consuming soy, yeah, it's pretty equivalent in terms of, protein, carbs, vitamin D, again, added back, and calcium. Rice milk, almond milk, any of those other milks, probably not meeting your protein or the quality of that protein. And then depending on the brand, is going to vary with some of the other types of calcium that it is fortified with. It may not be, again, the most absorbable form of calcium. And if I choose not to drink milk, can I get the same nutrients from food? Sure you can. So let's look at meal 1. We've got about 100 grams of tuna, which is about a serving and a half. We've got 3 cups of broccoli. Well, my kid would eat 3 cups of broccoli. So, 2 stalks, not too bad. But then I got about 1.5 cups of almonds. That's like 6 servings of almonds. That's a lot of almonds. Probably more challenging, again, to get that amount of calcium, vitamin D that would be coming from like 2 cups of milk. Same thing on the other side. So you've got, 6 hard-boiled eggs. I've got lots of athletes that would do that, no problem. 3 cups of kale, great. Again, a cup of Brazil nuts, pretty expensive to get that amount in. And again, is it the better absorbable form? Quickly going to talk about omega-3s. Again, vegetarian diets tend to be high in our omega-6s, which are great, essential fatty acids, but low in our omega-3s. So yes, there are some vegan supplements, omega-3 sources, and I think they're made mostly from seaweed. So again, maybe not as high. They're high in what we call that should be ALA, not APA. ALA, alpha linoleic acid, which is your plant-based omega-3, versus your EPA and DHA, which come from your fatty fish. Those are the ones that we're seeing more positive benefits in terms of reducing inflammation, great for cognitive, and also a huge amount of research around DHA and recovery from concussions. So again, not the same quality, still giving the same amount of essential omega-3s, different type. And don't get me wrong, I'm not poo-pooing vegetarian ways of eating at all. I just am presenting the science behind the differences. So zinc is the other one. Again, I've rarely screened for zinc unless I have a reason to believe that there's some potential deficiencies or symptoms of deficiencies. Vegetarians actually require 1.5 times more zinc, and zinc is one that actually has an upper limit as well. So you have to be careful. You're just not popping zinc supplements. Zinc is lower absorbed, again, in a vegetarian diet. So we're going to look at the risks and, again, whether we choose to supplement or not. So we have some tips and things we can do in order to increase zinc intake and absorption. So obviously consume foods that are high in zinc, legumes, whole grain bread, cereals, brown rice, soy products. Again, soy keeps kind of coming up through the ranks. Consume foods with organic acids like citric acids found in fruits and vegetables at the same meals to aid in the absorption. If we're soaking our legumes, we'll get more of that zinc from those. And then consume sprouted beans, grains, seeds, again, that contain yeast, probably not their best friend sometimes. And avoid excessive intakes, again, of wheat bran with that phytic acid, same thing with iron. Oh, I moved my screen. Okay. So there's our requirements. Again, if we're saying that athletes or vegans need 1.5 times the amount, this is what we're looking at in terms of amount of zinc for those different age populations. Where we get zinc from, you can see them all on the right in terms of, again, amounts, and then you're looking at these amounts on the left going, okay, so we're looking at, adolescent years, between maybe, 6 to 9, even higher than that. And then we're looking at, again, some of the amounts that are coming in some of our vegan foods, quite low, right? So if we look at a vegan plate, a little bit different than I just happen to have one here, the food guide, right? And again, an athlete's plate would look a little different because we would probably have a bit more of the grains and starches. I would have fruits on the side. Veggies, maybe, a third of the plate. And then your nuts and seeds and beans and lentils and soy would probably be like a quarter of the plate for a vegan athlete. But definitely want to get those combinations, again, to complement those absorption of some of those nutrients at risk. This is based on, again, the old Rainbow Food Guide, but when I think a dietitian in Canada came out with what we call a vegetarian food guide to match the old food guide, and this is sort of what it looked like. So, and I like this. I think this worked well for athletes, actually, because you've got all their grains, so all of their great carbohydrate needs being met, and then you've got their protein, vegetarian protein sources, and then again looking at sort of calcium rich foods being kind of down here, all these guys, and then you've got your fruits, again, good carbohydrates as well, and then you've got your fats sort of on the small array of the rainbow. Great paper. If I can refer you to anything, this is a great resource for basically everything we just touched on, nutrition considerations for vegetarian athletes. So encourage you to PubMed that if you're interested. And just to kind of recap, so, ways to plan, variety is key. So if I have a lot of athletes who are very limited, even in whatever style of veganism they're eating, if they're limiting certain groups of foods within that, can get very challenging to get the bioavailability of those nutrients at risk. Minimum 8 servings of calcium-rich foods. So you saw the amounts that they needed to get their calcium, and then again have enhancing the absorption. I didn't have iron on there, but again, including iron-rich sources, and then not including those foods that impede or decrease the absorption, and then vitamin C to increase. 2 servings of omega-3 foods. So yeah, your flaxseed oil, walnuts would be great sources. Again, different type of omega-3, and then adequate amount of vitamin D. So again, fortification or potentially supplements at that point. And then looking at if they're getting their B12. Like I said, B12 is almost less on my radar, just because if they're doing a lot of fortified foods, B12 tends to be highly fortified in a lot of those milk alternatives, or they can include nutritional yeast. So they generally, like benefits, again, I might sound poo-pooing vegetarian eating, but they're usually pretty good in terms of carbohydrates, because they're including beans and lentils, and those are higher naturally in carbohydrates anyway. So it's great because they're getting double whammy, carb and protein there. If they're eating variety-based plant sources, yeah, they can meet their protein needs. Definitely higher in fiber, so it might be a little more challenging to skew their protein choices when it comes to certain competition times and times of training where they wouldn't want all that fiber. And even FODMAP, so those fermentable oligodisaccharides, polyols, that tend to come from a lot of these protein plant-based foods, can be a little bothersome if they've got a little bit of a sensitive tummy around competition too. I always tell them, like, don't go all whole grains. Make half of them refined, and I work with parents even in that, because again, they're getting more fortification in the processed ones, which they need. So it's okay to have half of your grains be the whole grains, and the other half be fortified or processed. Not going to talk about creatine supplement, but definitely with a lot of my vegan athletes, creatine comes from meat. We make it through animal consumption. So if they're actually not getting that creatine through diet, they may be at a lesser advantage in terms of increasing their skeletal muscle creatine, and then improving sort of that high intensity bouts, because creatine regenerates that adenosine triphosphate, ATP, that quick source of energy, and then can lead to muscle gain as well. So we may consider, if they're over 18, maybe a supplementation with creatine. That is it for me. And I think I'm right on the money in terms of timing. So can definitely open it up to questions. I've yet to see my kid, so now I'm getting a little worried where he is.
Great, thank you, Angela. Like Angela said, if you have any questions, feel free to open your mic or put them in the chat box. We did already receive a question through the chat box, so I'll just read it out loud. How often and what should you screen for in a vegan and celiac university track athlete?
Oh, that's a double whammy. Vegan, so iron for sure. So celiac, you're not, again, absorbing the iron. And then again, if they're not getting the bioavailability of quality iron through a vegan diet, iron would be definitely one I would screen probably every 3 months. B12 would be probably a good one. Vitamin D, I would just do in general. Iron, ferritin. So I would get ferritin, hemoglobin, and maybe some other markers of ferritin, and we can chat offline, but there's sort of 3 other ferritin markers, serum transferrin, that may, again, kind of give us a better, clearer picture of that. But that's a tough one. But yeah, again, working with a sport doc, because you're probably not going to get like a 3 months every 3 months being able to screen for iron, but iron would probably be one of my bigger ones I would question.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to open your mic or write in the chat box. All right. Well, thank you so much, Angela, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. As mentioned, this will be posted on YouTube, so if you want to go back and review anything, definitely feel free to do so, and I will be following up this presentation with an email, so I'll include some resources. And if you do want to talk further with Angela, we can stay online to ask or to answer any questions. So thanks again, and we hope to see you tomorrow night, where Chris will be coming online to talk to us about how to coach with emotions.
Ooh.
So thanks, everyone.
Lynn, I like